Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy Quist. I'm the author of the book, The Bold New Normal, and convener of the conference, The Bold New Normal, and host of the podcast, The Bold New Normal. I work in financial services. I am from Ghana and the UK. And I am just excited to be on Just for Women Africa.
You have led major global institutions, Ford, Airtel Ghana, Morgan Stanley, and Barclays. What does it mean to you to head such institutions?
Well, first of all, to get to lead large organizations means that you have the opportunity to grow and navigate. So, first of all, it means a representation of the journey that has happened. And I always like to emphasize that because sometimes we get to know people when they're at sort of much further in their journey, and it looks like we should just get there, but it's taking years of hard work, resilience, nose falling over, falling up, falling down, getting up again, being encouraged, so on and so forth. So what it means is a representation of that journey, but it also means a platform and an opportunity to use those positions to actually create opportunity for other people to come along the journey, and also to demonstrate that in this context, people like me can also achieve success in their career, success as in make progress to very senior levels, but not without the pain that comes with the journey.
What was the biggest challenge you faced as the first Ghanaian woman to lead a multinational telecoms company in Ghana?
My biggest challenge was the fact that the business needed to be turned around. It wasn't just a shoe into an organization that was running smoothly. It had, gone through a phase, and I believe that every leader gets an organization from A to B. So it was at a phase where the shareholders thought that someone like me could work on the next phase of the journey. So the biggest challenge was actually turning the business around. It's like turning a ship that's running. You're asking it to turn a different way, and that involves um, turning people around, right? You only achieve change and turnaround and transformation by getting people to change and turn around. And because it was the first time a Ghanaian woman was leading a telecommunications company, the response was mixed bag, right? Some people were all in for it and they were well behind it. And others were like, I've never seen a woman do this job before. So what can you actually do? So the second challenge, I would say, which is built on the first, is the fact that I really needed people to believe and to come along with me on this journey as a woman, even though they hadn't seen a woman in this position before. I think what always helps me is I don't think of myself as different to start with. That's not my leading thought process in any situation. I go in thinking of me as Lucy, and being a woman. All these things that you can use to describe me are part of what make me who I am. But there's no one thing that defines me. So I don't walk around thinking, oh, I'm a woman, I've come into this position. Okay, what's happening? What do women do in this position? Is what do people do, and what do I need to do to be successful? I don't put myself as in there's a bucket called women, and so that's the bucket I have to ascribe to all the time. It is a leadership position. I always say to people that intelligence and the ability to do things, I don't believe is gendered. I believe that you have to really understand the rules of engagement, understand the expectations, and deliver to those expectations, because no one's going to give you a pass for being a woman. So those are the two main challenges: turning your business around and getting people to believe in the leadership in for some people of a woman for the first time to come along on the journey.
You said no one will give you a pass because you're a woman, but a lot of women think that way. What can be done to change that?
Well, the thing that needs to change is socialization. We need to stop socializing girls to think they're different. Because am I naively saying that, oh, both men and women are physically 100% the same? Of course not. There are things that go on in women's bodies that don't go on in men's bodies. So I'm not naively saying that. But when it comes to potential ability to achieve, to do things, to get things done, no, all throughout history, we have ample evidence on every continent of the world, including Africa and every country of the world. We have evidence of women who went out of their way to lead and the difference they made, right? So the bottom line is that, again, engineer fact based, the evidence demonstrates that women can do a lot of amazing things. But unfortunately, we keep socializing them to think that they are less than. Which brings me on to my concrete example of my own socialization. My dad was an Ashanti man. And for those of you, anyone who knows Ashantis, they're a very matrilineal society. So in some ways, not in all ways, but in some ways, women hold a lot of sway in their society from in areas like, because it's matrilineal, the family line goes to the women. Even though the king of Ashanti is always a man, the person who chooses the king is the queen mother, so always a woman. So that's a good foundation to build on. And I felt that I did, perhaps through him being able to build on that with his education and his exposure, meant that he never socialized me as, you're a girl, so you can't do this and you can't do that. And so when he was fixing things, doing his engineering work at home, I looked down to look at a socket and a plug. He would say, teach me how to do it. By the time I was 5, he had taught me how to change a fuse on a plug. And I never had this sense from him of what I should do versus what my brother can do. I didn't get it. And so I didn't grow up thinking in terms of limitation as a girl. And I always say to people that by the time I fully realized that societies think of a difference between what girls and boys can achieve, I was actually like 17. And it really dawned on me. I had an experience. I was like, oh, people think I should do differently because I'm a girl. I didn't know that. And it was too late. By the time I'm 17, my mind is set, like the way I think of myself is already set. And so we need to stop socializing girls with limitation. Yes, some people want their daughters, they want, oh, you're going to be a mom, yeah, you need to have to cook, but boys can learn to cook too. But more importantly, don't teach the girl things that you think are only girl things. Teach her the girl things that you want to teach her by all means. But don't deprive her of the so-called non-girl things. Don't let a girl think that she can't do math. Don't let a girl think she can't lead. Don't let a girl think she can't have an opinion. Don't let a girl think she can't be as successful as anybody else. Just make the socialization of women and girls more balanced.
Many African countries focus on poverty reduction. You argue for prosperity creation. What practical steps can governments and businesses take today?
So first of all, I'm very careful when I'm answering hot questions that are about Africa, because it's 54 different countries, different stages of their journey. And we're not a monolith, right? So we're not a monolith at all. But I guess where we can agree based on the question you ask, which is something I write about extensively in my book, is that we have tried poverty eradication for a long time. I'm an engineer. I like facts and data and evidence. The bottom line is poverty eradication has not worked. And I tell you why it hasn't. One of the reasons why it hasn't worked. If I'm not mistaken, the definition of poverty is you live on less than $2 a day. That's the definition, the global definition of poverty. And the way I look at it, I say to people, and this will apply to most people listening, right? Because most people listening live on more than $2 a day. So I say to people, if you were living on $2 a day, and I suddenly came up with a solution that gave you $2.50 a day, you're technically no longer poor, but are you thriving? You're still in survival mode. All it takes is one headache where you need to buy some paracetamol and then you're out of pocket. So when we focus on eradicating poverty, we're focused on a little more is enough. And I don't believe in that. I believe that we need to set ambitious goals. So what should governments do? They should set ambitious goals that create prosperity for their people. And what I mean by that, by prosperity, is the opportunity for people to thrive, not survive day to day, but to thrive through life. What does it mean to thrive? It means that certain basic needs should be met, whether it's healthcare, education, whether it's food supply, whether it's access to decent jobs. These are things that governments should actually put real targets on how they're going to move the needle on those things. And then you create the enabling environment, which then means that it's up to the individual to make the most of their life and their potential and their skills and their ability. But if people wake up and they're hungry because food is beyond their means, they wake up and they can't afford to be sick because they can't afford to go to hospital, or they can't afford to get their children decent education, get themselves decently educated, then it's difficult for the fourth thing to be true, which is have a decent job that then allows you to thrive. Because the earlier question you asked me about my career was very much built on opportunity, right? Because I equally could have been that poor child living on $2 a day and poverty had been eradicated. So now I live on $2.50 a day. Or what do you call it? Five, whatever number you want to call it, a little more than $2 a day. And you and I would not be having this conversation, right? And that's how I think governments they need to fundamentally shift how they're thinking about outcomes for their people and create policies that align to those different outcomes with real numbers backing, understanding the numbers, the people, the investment, the time frame, the sustainability that's needed. Because I think that's another challenge we have, that whether it's government or it's the people, we tend to think that the solution should happen overnight. But change actually takes time. So we also have to develop the appetite for consistency, for persistence, and for sticking to things over a long time.
What inspired you to write The Bold New Normal, and why should people read it?
The inspiration was young people. So when I became CEO of Excel in 2014, 11 years ago now, in that journey, I had so many young people asking for mentorship, for guidance, and so on. And I do try to mentor, even to this day, I still do. But I realized this goes back to, I love that you asked this question actually, not because it talks about my back, but the solution part that I talk about. And I sat back and I thought with my team, we sat down, we actually did a whole strategy session. I thought, I want to reach more young people. What do I do? So we literally sat in the office end of 2014. We came up with a strategy, and essentially I said, okay, I'll use social media. So I'm not a massive user in terms of social interaction, but I'm a massive user for propagation of messaging. And so I decided that I was going to write the things I would tell people one on one, because if I write it on social media, more people hear it at the same time than a one on one meeting. And so I started writing religiously 3 times a week. And then I gave speeches and delivery and so on, which then evolved into I was asked to give a TED talk in 2016, 2 years later. And when I sat down and I thought about the TED talk, that's where the actual name, The Bold New Normal, comes from. It's the TED Talks. I have a TED talk on this. And then 2 years later, after the TED talk, when I had some time, I sat back and I thought, why don't I put all of this together in a book so that people have the opportunity to read? So it's always been in service of that younger population that's coming up and how I want them to really think about the future of their continent, defining, changing what we see as normal, redefining our normal, and boldly pursuing it. So it's all about our future, it's about what we need to build today into the future. Was written with young people in mind. We've actually just done a translation into French as well. So it's available in French as well, La Nouvelle Norme Audacieuse, because I want to reach as many young people across not just young, across the African continent. And that's why they need to read it. Reading it is about redefining, reshaping what you think is possible for you as an African and what you can do about it. It's the same subject on my podcast. It doesn't change. I have a singular message of a transformed continent that allows every African to prosper. I think I might. Do I have a copy now? I do. Let me show you. So this is the important thing. The bold new normal, yes, that's what we want. We want to create the Africa where everybody prospers. This is why we have this book. And that's why they should read it.
You have said Africa is one of the most mismanaged brands in history. What 3 things must we do to change that brand?
Very recently, there was a big debate in the media in the UK. And the debate was around the fact that a musician of Ghanaian origin had challenged the people who had written the Live Aid song. Some people may be too young to remember this, but it was certainly in my lifetime. I think it was in 1984. And the Band-Aid song was about poverty in Africa and how we don't even know it's Christmas in Africa. That song now, or was it 85? The song is about 40 years old, and please to Google it if you don't know about it. But it has turned out to be one of the most damaging pieces of propaganda on Africa ever. The people who wrote the song, and I won't name them, you can find out more if you want to. They wrote it on the basis of they thought they were doing something good for Africa because their perception of Africa was poverty, hunger, and starvation. At the time, there was a famine in Ethiopia. So that's one country of 54. But instead of being specific about the issue, and by all means, I'm all for helping people, they made it an issue of 54 countries. The song was about desperation in Africa. And it was about how the rest of the world had to give us effectively arms, charity, to sustain us. Why do I give this? And the debate in the media, I started with a debate media, was that this musician of Ghanaian origin refused to participate in the 40th anniversary remake and recast. And it turned into a whole debate because it started with, oh, this African is ungrateful. We've done all this to raise money for them. And now he turns around. And then because of the negative press he got, people started inviting him to do interviews. And on the media, he managed to unpack and explain the hugely negative impact of this Band-Aid song to raise money for Africa, to the extent that they had to change some of the lyrics. Some other musicians refused to participate. And now to actually do it, they had to change some of the lyrics in the song for the 40th anniversary. But leading on from that, the person who was a main proponent who wrote the song, he's now retiring from it, right? Now, why do I take this time to painstakingly tell you this story? It is just one example of multiple institutions, typically outside of Africa, but including within Africa, that have gone out of their way to sell a very negative story about Africa or an African country to raise money, to do things for us. So we talk about how we want investment, how we want people to come to Africa, how we want things to move in Africa. But I'm telling you, the real big business in the world is not thinking about Africa. People may be challenging, may say, oh, but Lucy, all these big companies are on the continent. The real money they're making, the real future strategy they're making, it's not about us. Because the brand is so mismanaged and so tied to lack and poverty and the lack and the absence of opportunity to thrive, that everybody thinks of us as we give them a bit that's left over. Now, back to the point about mismanagement. Why is this the case? We have allowed other people to determine what Africa is and what the African brand is. Many African countries who are thriving actually have a better brand representation than Africa as a continent, right? And we haven't intentionally decided what we want our country and our countries and continent to be known for. And so that's the mismanagement part. Mismanagement comes from not only from doing the wrong thing, but it also comes from being unintentional. And I smile because my children keep saying, Mommy, as for you, everything's about intentionality, intentionality, intentionality. We have to be intentional in life. We have to decide what we actually want people to think of us. We have to decide what we actually want people to know of us and put it out there. So it's mismanaged because we don't manage it. It's mismanaged because we allow others to negatively manage it. And this is such an important question because it affects how investors see us. It affects how we're seen around the world. It affects how the world engages us. You and I know of current sitting, president talking down on Africa because everybody feels that they can just say whatever about this African continent. So if you're listening to me in your Africa, then first of all, I want you to think about, what do you think about your country? And what do you think about Africa? And secondly, what do you say about your country? And what do you say about your continent? Because you're also a brand manager of Brand Africa.
What mistakes do foreign investors typically make when entering African markets?
Insufficient understanding of the African. Respectfully, they all do their market research. They all look at the data and the numbers. But a lot of the time, they expect that the market dynamics should be the same. Because we all go to school, do our MBAs, our economics, and we're taught all these economic theories. And then we assume that those theories should fully apply when we enter the African market. But there are nuances, and the nuances go far beyond what's in the textbooks. Because the truth of the matter is, the textbooks aren't written with Africans in mind. The textbooks aren't written with African data. So if your data set or your information source is misguided, then you have a degree of being misguided. Now, where they do get it right, the ones who end up staying are the ones who then are able to learn from the market, eat a bit of humble pie, and adjust their models to the continent. And I give you a concrete example. One of the most successful industries on the continent is telecommunications. But telecommunications has been successful because the model that's applied in Africa is uniquely African, right? Look at how over the decades, our point of sale has been effectively a young person on a street corner or somebody on the street corner, not just a young person. Look at how we evolved the whole prepaid market, very uniquely African. Look at how we have evolved mobile money, completely uniquely African. As in fact, the product was developed because the people had already started using airtime as a proxy for sending money, and then the operators use that knowledge to create the product. So I think what's important is that the evidence clearly shows, and it's the same around the world. It's just that people forget about it when they're coming into Africa. You've got to understand the people who you're serving, in addition to what you know about your business model, and adjust and adapt your model to suit the people that you're serving.
How do you ensure continuity of ownership so African businesses last beyond the first generation?
First thing is that we've got to, as a collective, now I'm being very, very general here, in terms of thinking of us as a collective, because I'm sure I have examples and other people will have examples of businesses that have survived beyond the first generation across the continent. They aren't as many as we would like, because that's what really helps create generational wealth and prosperity. But um, a big gap is around succession planning. So what you typically find is that the founder is not thinking beyond their own lifetime of how this business will survive. And in fact, you shouldn't be thinking beyond just your lifetime. You just have to think that at some point, even if it's through retirement, you won't be the right person to lead the business. If you think about the business in that context, then you start to think about successors, and successors are not necessarily your children, because the hunger, the passion, the journey that got you to start that company and make it what it is not the same life journey that your children have had. So there may be some who turn out to be the right person to succeed, but a lot of the time, it really isn't the case. And especially by the time you get to second generation after the founder, it's almost never the case. So that's number one. You have to think beyond yourself. Now, what is a most important ingredient is my second point. Sometimes I feel that on the continent, we overly wrap our identity. Maybe it's an entrepreneurial thing, a first generational entrepreneurial thing, that the person wraps too much of their own identity in this company that they formed, which means that they don't have the room and the capacity to allow for other identities of the company. And there's a fear of, if I'm not in charge of this entity, who am I? We have to be able to exist as people who are, like, our being beyond what we do, right? What I do is a part of me, but it's not all of me. And there's so many other things I should be able to do. So don't overly make your identity all about what you do, because then you struggle with succession because you feel you're being replaced and you're no longer relevant. But imagine a world where you take your learning, and I think a great example in this case, I will name names. A great example in our current time is Tara, House of Tara in Nigeria. I know her personally. Amazing woman. She's built this business over decades, but she's now handed it over. She's handed it over to a new CEO to run the company. And at the same time, she is using her lessons to work on something new, which is about bringing up other businesses, other people in business. Isn't that just beautiful? So stop thinking that this one thing that you have created is the only thing that you can create and it only has to survive with you. Think beyond that. And then the last thing I would add on there, in terms of, in addition to thinking beyond yourself, is thinking about your economic impact. Think about the fact that if this entity that you've created and serves so many people collapses, you have taken a service away from your people, away from your nation. It is a service that contributes to wealth creation, to prosperity of the nation. You employ people, you provide inspiration, you direct aspiration. Don't let that entity die with you, because that's a part of our challenge with creating prosperity. We keep resetting to zero every time the founder dies, and we need to stop this.
How do we particularly make STEM attractive to young Africans, especially girls?
So I use three examples, three countries to talk about this, and you've named two of them, and I'll add one more. But before I get to the countries, the fundamental issue is socialization. Remember what I talked about in terms of how girls are being socialized a few minutes ago, what they can and can't do? STEM is overly treated as this hard, for want of a better word, masculine field of study. That you have to have a boy's brain to be able to do STEM. One, here I am, a chartered engineer, and all the other things I've done, leading organizations. And the last time I checked, I was still a girl and a woman. So fundamentally not true. So first of all, we have to stop socializing them and telling them even before they've had an opportunity to do it that they can't do it. And this is an important one because do people actually think boys don't doubt themselves? Right? My oldest son today is in medical school. When he was a little boy, 6 years old, he came home in tears saying he can't do science. And I'm so convinced to this day that somebody must have said something to him. I took the time, and this is a boy, right? So my point is everybody has doubts. Only 6 years old. I took the time, sat with him, unpacked why he was feeling this way, explained simple things to him. I said to him, "Are you breathing?" He said, "Yes." I said, "When you do science, they'll explain this to you." I said, "You like animals. When you do science, they tell you how." And I really simplified it. Now, would he have entered medical school without this conversation? I don't know. I can't say for a fact. But what I was willing to do is not is to step in and ensure that he does not grow up thinking that STEM is beyond him. The rest is history. We'll come. So that's not the point. It's an example. Stop socializing them to think that they can't do it. Encourage them. If a girl can't solve a math problem, guess what? Many boys can't solve a math problem too. So let me go back to the country examples. If you take Ghana, which I've already explained I'm from, we do have, we sometimes over-index on the role of boys and girls or men and women in society. And I think that hurts us in many ways. So not only do we over-index on boys do STEM, but also we over-index on the idea that STEM subjects are really difficult. And so for that reason, if it's difficult, the girls don't do it. So we've got to address that. So that is an example where I'm talking about the identification of a problem. If I think about the Nigerian example that you gave, without having all the facts, I don't know all the facts and figures, I think Nigerians in general are a lot more economically ambitious. It's a big country, it's over 200 million people. Nigerians tend to put themselves in a situation where they're thinking, what's going to give me the best economic outcome? And we all know that STEM careers over the long run can be extremely successful. A lot of people who go on to lead business entities and so on around the world, not just in Africa, tend to have STEM backgrounds. I could read you off a whole list of male and female who actually came from STEM backgrounds before they became CEOs. So that's a different example that says, if you want great economic outcomes in the long run, STEM is actually a really important field. And then I take the Rwandan example where they have encouraged girls where instead of just having beauty pageants, they actually have Miss STEM pageant. In life, what you celebrate gets attention. If you celebrate the fact that girls are in STEM, unlike the Ghana example where we say, "Oh, girls shouldn't be doing this, it will hurt." Growing up, I even had people challenge me about how you get married, all kinds of ridiculous things, right? How will you get married if you do STEM? How will you get married if you're an engineer? All kinds of a silly thing. Well, Rwanda's gone the other way and they celebrate girls in STEM through this Miss STEM pageant. So tell me, if you're a young girl growing up, don't you want to be Miss STEM? I think you will be, right? So there's a lot we can do to turn this tide around. And I'll add one more point that builds on your question, and it's this. We are a continent that needs a lot of fixing. The reason why I advocate for greater participation in STEM is that we have to create so many solutions. We have to solve so many problems. We need people who are analytical, who are doers, who are creators, who can build machines, who can solve problems. So we need many more people in our STEM field to innovate and create our way out of poverty.
What skills do you believe every African child must have by 2030?
I have a younger brother who graduated as a teacher in the last academic year and best in class, but not just first class, topped his year. And he got posted to teach in a school in a village. And he was apprehensive. This is in Ghana, by the way. He was apprehensive, and I said, "Go. You should take it. Don't try and force your way to get a city location. Go to the village and go and help them." And they were super excited because they have a struggle with teachers coming to the village and more so getting a teacher who's best in class, right? And he had already had teaching experience because as he was studying, he was teaching. And so last night, we got on the phone because he's home for Christmas, so getting an update on some of the kids, how it's going, and so on. And it just makes me sad. I'm sorry. He said, sis, like, they're kids as old as JHS3 who can't really read and write. Now, to put it into context for anyone who doesn't know what JHS3 means, these kids are probably about 15. So I know people would love to hear an amazing response that says get them to do AI and let them to be STEM and blah, blah, blah. What worries me more is that when we talk like that, then we're really reflecting the circles within which we operate and the people that we see who are like us. But we insufficiently represent the lived experience of people day to day. We have to level the playing field in skills. And the fundamental need is every child has to be able to not just read and write, but actually comprehend what they read and write. And by comprehension, I mean understand and be able to do something with the information. And I talk about this in the book. I say, all these children make an effort and go to school every day, but how many of them are actually getting really useful information? Sorry. And not just about city dwellers, but that's why I started with the story of the village, because the vast majority of children on the African continent are actually in state-run institutions where we have too many leaving school, unable to actually use anything they learned in school. So that's issue number one, right? If you told me that by 2030, which is not long to go, 2030 is 5 years, everyone can read. By 2050, which I think is one of the stats that we put out, we'll have a lot more, and we can come back to the detail of that question. But the first thing we need to do, of 2050, first thing we need to do is get educational attainment, prioritize that for every African child to level the playing field. Then we can build on that to more sophisticated skills, right? So if in the child's ability to read and write, we are teaching them African examples, they can start to apply themselves in an African context. What do I mean by that? We all go to school now. I'm veering into my STEM point that I want to make. We get taught about a balanced diet. It's very basic and fundamental, but the vast majority are being given examples of balanced diets of foods they've never seen before, right? An African mother gives her child something that's made of a leaf. In Ghana, let's say kontomire, a carbohydrate like yam, they add meat, they add various things. That is a balanced diet. Why can't we put that in a textbook? Why is the child having to read of food that they will never understand or see in their lifetime? So one is basic comprehension. Two is teaching them to apply. Right? This is an important skill because if our children and our people can apply what they know to their own environment, then it means that everything else they learn, they will learn in ways to apply. Whether it's economic theory, they'll think of how do I apply it in Africa. Whether they're learning AI, they'll think of AI for Africa, not just copy paste AI. I could go on and on and on, but we have a gap between attainment and that outcome of pursuing new technologies, new ways of doing things and so on, because there's this application layer that we're not addressing. And so what happens is that we have so many intellectuals who just want to take something from another part of the world and just slap it on. And then we get disappointed. It happens a lot in political circles. They try really hard, right? And they try to apply models and theories that they learned elsewhere. The recent example in recent years has been, an economist becoming a politician and talking about our currency and economy and saying that our fundamentals are broken. That's why our currency suffered. On the one hand, he was right, but where he struggled was the applicability of solutions. Why? Because that economic model you studied abroad or you learned of is not the model that applies. So we go and study economics and we're taught supply and demand. And those of you who know it, the supply curve, demand curve, blah, blah, blah. When I was studying this subject, I thought to myself, but that's not how it works in Ghana. Why? Because first of all, we have information asymmetry. We have high search costs, right? The fact that a product is available in Kupumini may or may not be available in Makola, but I don't know. I have to physically go to Makola and go and look for it. And the arbitrage is real. And the third reason is that actually, when I go to Makola, that Makola woman, she's not determining her prices based on supply and demand. She's making some other arbitrary decision on whether she will sell to me or not. And that Makola example has a huge sway on how the economy works because people are bulk buying from them. People are learning what pricing is there. They go to Makola and they go back to their little suburb of Accra, and that's how they're determining their prices. And yet the person in the suburb of Kumasi doesn't have access to this information, so on and so forth. So we have a completely different application layer. So you asked me what we need to learn. We need to learn how to apply our knowledge to our context. We need the knowledge. We need that level playing field of our academic attainment, but we really need to learn how to apply it to ourselves. I'll give you one more example, which is medical, especially when people study medicine outside of Africa, then it's very difficult to relate to all of the examples of disease. But if I go back to a specific example of malaria, we're best placed to treat malaria because doctors apply themselves contextually. In many parts of the world outside of Africa, if you go there and you have malaria, you're put in an isolation ward because it's assumed to be contagious. I'm using this example not to vilify, but to say that's what I mean by application, right? You apply in the context and make good on your knowledge to create value in it within your environment. And this is what is missing. I could give you all the fancy titles, go and learn AI, go and learn this, but what's missing is application. Because even when we learn AI, right, and we become AI, we write our own, what are we applying it to? That application layer is what we need to fix on how we actually use our context, our knowledge, our ability, our exposure, our experience to solve for Africa. That's what I would say.
With Africa's population set to double by 2050, what must happen now to ensure prosperity instead of pressure?
Acceleration. So this goes back to my point about STEM, right? We have a population. So for those of you who don't get the context of the doubling, basically our population right now is about 1.4, 1.5 billion on the African continent, a little over 1 billion in sub-Saharan Africa. The vast majority of our population growth is going to be in sub-Saharan Africa. And the estimate is that by 2050, we'll have 1 billion more Africans. That's the heart of the question that has just been asked. But the point is this: today, in 2025, I forget the exact number, but a large proportion of Africans are young. So the point of the matter is that if we're getting 1 billion new people by 2050, that's 1 billion new people who are under 25. I want people to see the magnitude of your question. So we'll have 1 billion more people who are under 25. Imagine the population who are under 10 today. They will all be part of that young generation. The ones who are over 10 are probably will be parents and so on. So that's the magnitude of the challenge, that more than half, much, much more than half, will be proper young people. And so if you put young people in a situation where they can't attain things for themselves, they can't get access to food and drink. In fact, that example I gave earlier on for my brother, he said people in the village almost have accepted that one day they'll have to import water. I'm like, import water from where? Like, give you that example to say that the more people we have, the more pressure our resources will be under. And when I say resources, I don't mean gold and diamond. And so I'm talking about just the things we need to survive: food, water, all of these things. And so if we don't solve those issues in an accelerated manner, it will become more precious. So what does this actually mean for us? We need to get into those solutions that are large scale solutions. If we talk about food, for instance, we know today that a lot of our food, even the food that's produced that people say is not enough, a lot of it rots in transit. A lot of it doesn't make it off of the farm because it isn't great storage. That's a real problem to solve. And it tied back to my point about STEM. What are the food storage opportunities? What are the food processing opportunities? All of these things that help us make better use of what we actually have. So if we don't solve for our basic needs, healthcare, food, education, access to jobs, I keep it really simple, then the people become frustrated. And the problem with frustrated young people who have energy is that they have to find things to do with their energy. And unfortunately, if you don't solve it, then a lot of the things that happen are actually negative for society. So really, that's the unpacking of it. A lot more people, if we think our resources are constrained, if people sit in their village and think that there's somewhere they're going to import water from, they don't know what they're talking about. And these are the things we need to solve and address urgently, desperately. In a big, bold way, in a way that we sit back and we say, we no longer accept our countries and our continent as is. We want to define new outcomes. We have to be outcome focused. What do we want education to look like? What is the outcome of educating an African child? What is the outcome of feeding an African child? Are we feeding their brain with the right nutrients and opportunity? What is the outcome of healthcare for an African child? And solve for that, so that African child, that 1 billion, will become an asset rather than pressure, because then we have a workforce that is driving and spinning. And I'll add one more layer on this, the more intangible layer. I describe it, I say mindset, but think about a computer. The computer has software in it that we can't see, but it's what really runs it. We have to socially program our mindset, our software in all of our young people to really have that appetite and propensity to build their country and their continent.